Chapter 9, The Raging River. I know both of you want to return to your families, Livingston spoke to the boys the next morning as they prepared to leave the camp of the Manganja refugees. But I cannot risk repeating what happened yesterday. If what the Manganjas say is true, the villages around Lake Sherwa have been destroyed, and the likelihood of finding your families there is not good. And even if we did, he said, seeing the fear in their eyes, it wouldn't be safe for you to remain in this country right now. But what will we do? Chuma asked, disappointment sticking in his throat. Come back to the mission station with me. If I had been able to avoid bloodshed, we might have arranged safe passage through the war zone to reach the chiefs. They are the only real hope for bringing peace to the senseless war. But now, Livingston shook his head, we are likely to be targets for their arrows whenever we encounter a Jawa. It was a dejected and weary band that cautiously set out down the trail. No longer did they march along with confidence. Livingston decided that the only safe way to travel was by stealth, if they did not want to have to use their guns again. So he sent out a man to scout the trail ahead, and only when it was clear would the rest of the party silently follow. Once, when the scout discovered a party of Ajawa warriors resting beside a stream, Livingston decided they should leave the trail and cut through the dense jungle to circle far around the warriors. It was an exhausting detour. At times they found themselves in the middle of brambles with seemingly no way out. The thorns caught and would not let go. If each one was not carefully unhooked, it would tear skin or clothes. Worse, the bramble vines were so tough that they required several hacks from a machete before they would give way. Quiet, quiet, Livingston would whisper when someone would yelp or curse with the difficulty. We must not announce our presence. Finally, they came upon the trail of a herd of elephants and followed along with more ease where the beasts had beaten down the jungle in their passing. The second night of their return trip was spent without any shelter or fire while a hard, chilling rain fell. But doctor, protested some of the porters, no warriors will be moving about in weather like this. Good warriors will endure anything. Good peacemakers must do the same. No fires here. It rained most of the next day and only let up in the evening as the tired party trudged into the burned-out village on the cliff above the river. I still think this village is safe, said Livingston. If you can find dry wood that makes no smoke, I think we could have a small fire tonight, but try to shield it from view. The porters did not want to spend the night in the burned-out village, but the prospect of sleeping in the cold, wet jungle again drove them to brave it. They found a couple huts with their roofs still in place. Later, Livingston spread his map by the fire and said, I think this little river dumps into the Shire River just a few miles above the mission station. If those abandoned canoes are still down there on the beach, we could use them. It would be farther, 2 legs of a triangle, to the west and then south, rather than cutting directly cross-country. But it would be safer than traveling through the jungle. Yes, but doctor, said one of the porters, the great rapids and waterfalls begin just above the mission station. They go on for many miles. Once we hit the Shire River, we'd be in the worst of them. Indeed, the Murchison cataracts are too rough to take my steamboat up, but don't you think canoes could come down quite safely? What do you think? Doctor, they're terrible. Many people have lost their lives in them. Well, said Livingston, folding up his map, if it gets too bad, we'll just put ashore and walk. Travel on the small river the next morning was a pleasant change from hacking through the jungle. After assuring Dr. Livingston that they were skilled in handling a canoe, having used one often on Lake Sherwa, Chuma and Wikitani were allowed to share a small canoe of their own. 3 other canoes made up the remainder of their flotilla. Livingston and 2 porters were in one, while the other 2 canoes carried 2 porters each plus most of their supplies. We still must travel in silence, warned the doctor, and it was good advice. An hour later, they were gliding through an area where the jungle hung far out over the river from each bank, almost touching the water. Suddenly, there was yelling from both sides of the river just behind them, and a shower of arrows sailed after them. One arrow landed harmlessly in the bottom of the last canoe as the whole party paddled hard to get out of range. Whew, that was too close, murmured Wikitani as they sprinted around a bend in the river. If they'd heard us coming and been ready, we would have been like big fish in a little pool. No one could have missed, said Chuma. Where the small river joined the Shire River, a herd of hippopotami were swimming in the shallows. The paddlers steered well out of their way, knowing that the round, gentle-looking animals are some of the most dangerous animals in Africa. They do not like to be disturbed and can easily crush a canoe with a single bite of their powerful jaws. But by watching the hippopotami, the travelers were taken by surprise when the 4 canoes suddenly swept out onto the angry Shire River. Instantly, they were shot downstream with a force that the paddlers couldn't resist. At that point, there were no rapids, so the surface was deceptively smooth, but the speed with which the water moved was far beyond anything the boys had ever encountered. They could feel the powerful water drawing them this way and that with a will of its own. Within less than a mile, they came to the rapids. They were so steep and turbulent that as their canoes came upon them, it looked like they were ready to slide down a white mountain. "Look out!" yelled Chuma, who was sitting in the back. But there was nothing Wekotani could do, as a huge wave of water came over the bow of the canoe and landed in his lap with the weight of a bag of corn being dropped from a tree. The gallons of water in the bottom of the canoe made it heavy and even more difficult to handle. "Straighten us out!" screamed Wekotani over his shoulder as the current swept the canoe sideways toward a huge rock sticking out of the river. Chuma paddled hard, knowing that if the canoe hit the rock broadside, it would break in half like dried reed. But the current was too powerful. He could do nothing to straighten the canoe. And then, at the last moment, the bulge of water rising up before the rock swung their canoe around, and they shot past down into the trough, beyond like an eagle swooping down on its prey. But then they faced a mountain of water. The little craft rose on the curling wave and seemed to hang in midair for a moment, and then came down, dumping both boys into the raging river. The water around Chuma churned white with bubbles, and the strong current sucked him deeper into the darkness below. He kicked hard as he fought for the surface, but there was no resisting the cold monster that clutched him in its grasp. Down, down he went until all was blackness, and he had no idea which way was up. Suddenly, something raked the length of his back like the claws of a lion, and his head crashed into the stone. He tumbled helplessly over and over along the bottom of the vengeful torrent. The river was intent on knocking every bit of breath out of him. It began to get lighter, and Chuma noticed bubbles swirling around him. Were they his air, knocked from his lungs, or was he rising to the foaming surface? And then the river spat him out, and he flew into the air, face up with legs and arms outstretched toward a dazzling blue sky. For an instant he looked back over his shoulder and saw what must have happened. Above him was a roaring waterfall. Somehow he had plunged over it and been driven to the bottom of the pool below, then was coughed up by the river. He landed back on the water with a stinging splat and righted himself quickly. "Where's Wekotani? Where's the canoe?" He looked around desperately. 20 yards downstream he caught a glimpse of Wekotani clinging to the bottom of their overturned canoe as it bobbed on down the river. Chuma took a big breath and then struck out, swimming toward his friend. At least he's alive, Chuma thought. Something rose to the surface to his right. It was someone's clothes, dark blue like the doctor's. I should get them for him, the boy thought, but he was too exhausted and had swallowed too much water. I better just save myself, otherwise I might not make it. And then Chuma realized that it was more than the doctor's blue jacket. It was the doctor himself, floating face down in the swirling water. "Help!" Chuma yelled to anyone who might hear. He altered his course and swam for the blue patch, hoping it would not be sucked under before he got there. But the river was playing more tricks on him and kept moving the doctor away. "Oh, God," gasped Chuma. "If you are the black man's God, too, as the doctor says, don't let him die. Help me. Help me reach him in time." Finally, in one last sprint, Chuma reached out and grasped the back of the blue jacket. He rolled it over and pulled the doctor's face above water. There was a wound over one eye, and the older man didn't seem to be breathing. Chuma got a big handful of the white man's lank hair and tried swimming toward the western shore, but the riverbank was too far away. He would never make it. Every time he tried to take a fresh breath, a wave slapped him in the face, leaving him coughing and gasping. He seemed to take in more water than he spat out. Then, when he was about to give up, a rock island appeared right in front of him. He maneuvered to get his feet around the front of himself to catch his weight so they wouldn't crash into the rock too hard. When he hit, he got a footing on the upstream side, then reached for a handhold to pull himself up onto the slab of rock. He really needed two hands, but he was holding onto the doctor with the other. Grunting and straining, he pulled and pulled on the handhold and finally rolled to safety just as the current caught the doctor's body and swung him around downstream. Chuma almost lost his handhold. With all his might, he wrestled the doctor out of the grip of the terrible current, then dragged the doctor up onto the smooth stone beside him. The boy lay panting for a moment, but he knew he couldn't wait if the doctor had any chance of living. He rolled the soaking man over onto his stomach. The doctor's legs still hung in the river, buffeted by the rushing water. Chuma sat on top of the man and pressed all his weight into the middle of the man's back. Chuma raised himself, then pressed back down. Again and again he did the same. Suddenly a great stream of water gushed out of the doctor's mouth, and he began coughing and choking. Chuma rolled off and collapsed on the rock beside him. Then everything went black.
What's going to happen?